It looked extremely rocky for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 4-6 with but an inning left to play, and so when Cooney died at first, and Burroughs did the same, a pallor wreathed the features of the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go, leaving there the rest with that hope which springs eternal within the human breast. For they thought, if only Casey could get a whack at that, they'd put up even money with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, and likewise so did Blake. And the former was a puddin', and the latter was a fake. So on that stricken multitude, a death-like silence sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey's getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single to the wonderment of all, and the much-despised Blakey tore the cover off the ball. When the dust had lifted and they saw what had occurred, there was Blakey safe on second and Flynn a hugging third. Then, from the gladdened multitude, went up a joyous yell. It bounded from the mountaintop and rattled in the dell. It struck upon the hillside and rebounded on the flat. For Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile on Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat. No stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded as he wiped them on his shirt. And while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance gleamed from Casey's eye, and a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in a haughty grandeur there. Close by, the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. "That ain't me style," said Casey. "Strike one," the umpire said. And from the bleachers, black with people, there rose a sullen roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. "Kill him! Kill the umpire!" shouted someone from the stand. And it's likely they'd have done it had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult, and he bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and again the spheroid flew, but Casey still ignored it. And the umpire said, "Strike two!" "Fraud!" yelled the maddened thousands, and the echo answered, "Fraud!" But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain, and they knew that Casey would not let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball. And now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville, mighty Casey. has struck out.
Deep in the jungles of India lived the smallest elephant in the world. He could flap his ears just like any other elephant. He could swing his trunk just like any other elephant. And he could trumpet through his trunk just like any other elephant. But the other elephants wouldn't have anything to do with him. Tigers laughed rudely when they saw him lose his way in the tall jungle grass. The gaily colored birds hooted when they saw him trip over a twig. Nobody would make room for him when he came to the waterhole to drink. You see, the smallest elephant in the world was no bigger than a house cat. And for an elephant, that's very sad. The smallest elephant finally said, "Very well, if I'm no bigger than a house cat, then the house is where I belong, not in this fierce, wild jungle." So he tripped and stumbled through the tall grass until he came to a city with big ships at the docks, and he slipped aboard one of the ships. One day, while the elephant was sleeping on a crate of Indian curry powder, the great ship stopped. Next thing he knew, he was sailing through the air as the crate was hoisted out of the hold and onto the dock. "Now," said the smallest elephant in the world as he scampered between the legs of the stevedores, "I must find a house." Out on the street, everybody was so busy rushing from here to there that no one noticed an elephant the size of a house cat. But presently a little boy came down the street. He was busy, too. He was trying not to step on any cracks in the sidewalk. So naturally, he had no trouble spying the smallest elephant at once. "Just what I've always wanted," cried the little boy, whose name was Arnold. "An elephant the size of a house cat." "Wonderful," exclaimed the elephant, "because what I need is a house." No time at all, Arnold was home with his elephant. But Arnold's mother was not happy about it. What would people think? An elephant for a pet? Out of the question. "Don't worry, elephant," said Arnold as he led his pet outside and down into the cellar. "You just do what I tell you, and everything will be all right." Arnold trained the smallest elephant in the world to walk backwards, showed him how to keep his ears tucked in, taught him to wag his trunk like a tail. Then Arnold painted the most beautiful cat's face on the elephant's back. Arnold's mother did not really think they needed a pet, but a cat was better than an elephant. But that night, when everyone was asleep, a mouse came out of the woodwork to find a meal for himself. The smallest elephant was sleeping backwards in the potato bin so that he would look like a cat. The mouse, who knew a cat when he saw one, wasn't fooled for a minute. "What's this strange creature sleeping in the potato bin?" said the mouse to himself. And he went up to the elephant to investigate. And just then the elephant woke up. Even though he was the smallest elephant in the world, he knew a mouse when he saw one. And he was just as afraid of a mouse as the biggest elephant in the world. Of course, he woke up the whole house with his noisy trumpeting, and then Arnold's mother knew she'd been tricked. "An elephant belongs in a circus," she told Arnold, and that's where she took him. "Wonderful, wonderful," exclaimed the ringmaster. "I have just the spot for him." And he introduced the elephant to Hilo, the smallest midget in the world. Now, whenever Arnold wants to see his little elephant, he goes to the circus, because the ringmaster gave him enough free passes to last a long, long time. There in the sideshow is Hilo, holding the smallest elephant in the world over his head. The sign says, "The smallest man in the world, and he can pick up an elephant." The elephant's very happy about it. The circus animals never laugh at him the way the jungle animals did. In fact, the other elephants are quite proud of him. And best of all, he lives with Hilo, in a little house on wheels. "It's a good thing I'm no bigger than a house cat," said the elephant. "Otherwise, I'd never fit inside." So you see, there is room in the world for all sizes. And whether you're big, small, or in between, there is no measuring stick for a happy heart and a broad smile.
Long, long ago, there was an emperor who loved pancakes. Every day of the year, he had 6 pancakes for breakfast. Big yellow ones they were, and of course, they were round as round as round. One fine morning, the emperor came to breakfast feeling particularly merry, for it was his birthday. "Happy birthday, Your Excellency," said the court chamberlain, "and the same to you," beamed the emperor. "Oh, look, pancakes," cried the emperor. "Oh, how very nice," just as if he didn't have pancakes every day of the year. And there were the pancakes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each as round, as crisp as could be. But as the emperor reached for the sugar bowl, he stopped. He stopped and he stared and he gasped. Then he opened his mouth and roared, "Oblong! This pancake is oblong!" And so it was, as oblong as oblong. "Explain," roared the emperor. "Excellency, it would appear that it was a birthday present." "A what?" asked the emperor, a good deal surprised. "It was the frying pan," said the chamberlain. Then the emperor began to smile. "Oh, I think I see," he said. "The frying pan was a birthday present, and being oblong, it fried an oblong pancake." "Oh, you know," he said slowly, "I rather like the idea. Oblong pancakes, yes. After all, one likes to be a little different, doesn't one?" Well, the court chamberlain was very relieved. "Of course, Excellency, exactly," he said. "Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, 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 indeed." "Good," said the emperor. "Then that's understood. Oblong pancakes only in the future." Now that, you would think, was the end of the story, but it wasn't. In no time at all, the whole population was buying oblong frying pans and frying oblong pancakes. But as the emperor ate his oblong pancakes each morning, he felt something still seemed not quite as it should be. "Oh, of course," he murmured. "Why didn't I think of it before? Oblong pancakes need oblong plates. Why, it's common sense." The oblong plate was ordered and made. Well, once started, the emperor found himself unable to stop, and soon he was ordering something round to be changed to oblong every day. Soon, the people had oblong saucepans, oblong spoons, they ate oblong apples, wore oblong hats, bumped along the streets in carriages with oblong wheels. Even the hens, oh, the poor things, they were laying oblong eggs. The emperor was quite content, until one day, when he gazed up at the sky. "Oh, what a beautiful day," he sighed. "Oh, dear, what a beautiful..." Then he stopped. He stopped and he stared and he gasped. And then he opened his mouth and roared, "Round! The sun is round! Have it changed at once." "Oh, the sun, Excellency." "Yes, the sun," bellowed the emperor. "That great yellow round thing hanging over my lovely empire. It's ruining everything. Change it." Well, for weeks, the poor court chamberlain tried everything he could think of to change the shape of the sun, but nothing worked. At last, the emperor lost his patience. He'd do the job himself. "Do you not know," he said, "that every evening the sun comes down to the very edge of the earth? That's the time to deal with it." Well, off the emperor went. But, unfortunately, he had no better luck than did the court chamberlain, and the sun remained as round as round. Well, this went on for a long time, and in the meantime, the people were quietly going back to the old ways, changing things back to their round shape. Then, one day, the emperor returned looking very pleased with himself. "My people," he said, "I have failed to reach the sun, but," and he began to smile broadly, "it no longer matters. I have established by personal experiment, and beyond all reasonable doubt, a new and amazing scientific fact. The world is round." Everyone cheered, and the emperor bowed and smiled, and then he held up his hand again. "The world is round, my people, and very nice, too. So now, it is my wish that everything in the empire should also be round, to match." Well, the court chamberlain stepped forward. "Your Excellency," he said, "may it please Your Excellency, it is already done." The emperor was extremely pleased. And now, he said, rubbing his hands, what about breakfast? May I suggest pancakes, Your Excellency? Ventured the court chamberlain with a smile. Excellent, said the Emperor. Nothing could be nicer. Would Your Excellency prefer them round or oblong? Inquired the chamberlain, bowing as low as low. The Emperor thought for a moment, and then he said, oblong, please. I shall continue to have my pancakes oblong. After all, the frying pan was a birthday present, wasn't it? I wouldn't like to hurt anyone's feelings. And besides, finished the Emperor, settling comfortably back in his chair, besides, one does like to be a little different, after all. And so, that was that.
His ship wrecked in a storm, a sailor by the name of Gulliver crawled ashore and promptly fell asleep on the beach of a strange island. As he slept, the people of the island came to stare at him. People no different from you and me, except for the fact that the tallest of them was only 2 inches high. Gulliver was tied down by rope the thickness of strong thread. Before long, Gulliver awoke and jerked his left arm up sharply. He was about to do the same with his right arm when a shower of arrows, like so many pins, hit him in the side of the face. He watched as one of the soldiers, who clearly wanted a medal for bravery, steadily marched across his chest, climbing over the wrinkles of Gulliver's coat. When he was close enough, the soldier fitted an arrow into his bow and took aim at Gulliver's left eye. Not wanting to hurt the little man, Gulliver gently blew on him, which to the soldier felt like a hurricane. Now Gulliver lay still, looking in amusement at his tiny captors. Although he could easily have broken the threads holding him, Gulliver remained without moving, for he was interested in the little people and wanted to learn more about them. Meanwhile, a large platform was wheeled alongside of him, and through the use of cranes and pulleys, he found himself lifted onto the platform and carted away. At the palace, Gulliver met the king and learned that he was in the land of Lilliput. The king marched to within an inch of Gulliver's nose and spoke in a royal voice, which to Gulliver sounded more like a royal whisper.
You are now one of my subjects and must obey my every command.
After giving his solemn promise that he would do no harm, Gulliver was untied. A great shout of excitement came from the people as they gazed up at the visitor, who stood taller than their tallest buildings. At a motion from the king, Gulliver picked him up and held him close to his ear. The king said to Gulliver,
I give you permission to move freely about the countryside, so long as you are careful where you put your feet.
So Gulliver remained in the country of Lilliput for many months, and gradually the Lilliputians grew accustomed to looking up and seeing him suddenly towering over them. He was of great help to the little people, lifting huge stones for building walls and other constructions, and reporting to the king on the exact size of his kingdom, which he measured by pacing off steps around the island. In return, the king ordered new clothes to be made for Gulliver, and 200 tailors went to work on the job. The king also put 300 cooks to the task of keeping Gulliver supplied with food, while 30 servants kept him supplied with wine for his meals. The time passed pleasantly, and Gulliver was much interested in the customs of the tiny people and had many adventures with them. Then one day, the king told Gulliver that he should assist the Lilliputians in their annual war against the people of the neighboring island, the country of Blefuscu.
A very rebellious people,
The king went on.
who have refused to obey the law that states that when breaking an egg, the small end must be cracked first. Obviously, there is no choice but to declare war.
The opposing armies and navies were drawn up for battle. The men, horses, cannons, and ships readied. Learning that the Blefuscans were planning an invasion, Gulliver hit upon a plan for stopping them, for he did not want his new friends hurt. Wading across the channel of water that separated the two islands, Gulliver gathered up the anchor chains of the Blefuscan ships, towed the entire fleet back across the channel, and so frightened both armies that the war was ended before it started. Soon after, when a full-sized rowboat was washed up upon the shore, Gulliver decided it was time for him to return to his own country. With great skill, the Lilliputians sewed 100 bed sheets together to make Gulliver a sail for the boat, and gave him food and drink to last a month. When the time came for Gulliver's departure, the king and the entire population of Lilliput came down to the beach to see him off. The king presented Gulliver with his own sword as a souvenir, and Gulliver in turn gave the king his pocket watch to put in the tower of the town hall. And then, with a final wave, Gulliver set sail and took his leave of the little people of Lilliput.
A 150 years ago, much of that part of the United States known as the Ohio Valley was still a wilderness, but it was as familiar as a neighborhood park to one man. His name was Johnny Appleseed. He most often traveled on foot and always carried a leather sack filled with apple seeds. He planted these seeds in little patches in the wilderness wherever he went, for Johnny felt that fruit was one of God's great gifts to man. He saw it as his job to sow the seeds that would assure a ready supply of this fruit for the settlers who were just then beginning to turn their faces westward. Many of the trails that were later followed by these settlers to the west were first blazed by Johnny Appleseed in his wanderings. The beauty of nature was the only thing that really mattered to Johnny. He usually went barefoot, despite brambles, stones, and bad weather. Once a settler, seeing him plodding barefooted through the snow in midwinter, gave him a pair of shoes, only to meet him a few days later, again barefooted. "Where were the shoes?" the man asked. Well, it seems that Johnny had come upon a poor family that needed shoes worse than he did. For some years, his clothing consisted of cast-offs given him by settlers, but later on he decided on a coffee sack with holes cut in it for his arms and his head, and for a hat, he often wore the pan he used to cook his dinner in. Everyone respected Johnny, even the Indians who never harmed him, for they admired his courage and his love of nature. The settlers liked him because of his kindness and humility, and even the boys of the small, rough towns never teased Johnny, despite his strange appearance. He was also a great favorite of the little girls, because he usually managed to have a scrap of ribbon or a piece of calico to give them. No matter where he might be, he was always welcome in a remote cabin to stop for a night's lodging. The Indians didn't bother Johnny even during the War of 1812, when they roamed the countryside as British allies to burn out the settlers. For that reason, Johnny was able to act as sort of a Paul Revere, warning the farmers of the approach of Indian and British marauders, giving them time to take refuge in the fortified blockhouses. Although Johnny rarely had any possessions of his own, he was seldom completely without money, for he charged those settlers who could afford it a small price for his little groves of seedlings. Johnny, however, spent almost nothing of what he earned on himself, preferring to use his money to help animals. Often on the frontier, a settler's horse or his livestock had a cruel time of it, frequently being turned out to die when sick. Hearing of such a case, Johnny would buy the animal from its owner, nurse it back to health, then give it to someone else on the condition that it be well treated. Once, when Johnny found a wolf caught in a trap and badly hurt, he released it and nursed it back to health. The wolf became a pet and followed Johnny about like a dog. An old hunter used to tell that he'd come upon Johnny in the deep wood, playing with 3 bear cubs while the mother bear calmly looked on. Perhaps the bear was the same one that Johnny had befriended one cold night when he had built his campfire at the end of a hollow log. He had intended to crawl into the log for the night, but discovered that a bear and her cubs were already there. Poor innocent things, Johnny is said to have remarked. I'm glad I didn't turn you out of your house. He then carefully removed his fire and slept on the snow. The years went by, and the trees planted by Johnny grew and were heavy with the fruit in the autumn. Throughout the Ohio Valley, the orchards provided their bounty of apples for farmers as well as wayfarers who traveled Johnny's frontier trails. Johnny's fame spread throughout the country, and by the time of his death, he had already become a legendary figure. Many people felt that Johnny didn't really exist, but had only been made up in the tales told by the folks. But then one day, a little boy would be walking in the fields with his dog, and suddenly, there would be Johnny, with a smile and a story and an apple seed for the boy to plant. A seed which would grow and mature with the boy, and which he could always call his very own. As more and more settlers came west, they were greeted in the spring by the pink flowers of Johnny's trees, and the new land that they had come to seemed less strange and frightening. The trees were Johnny's message to them, saying, there's no need to fear. I have passed this way, and the land is good.
An old Japanese custom is the storyteller at the street corner. When you hear the clack, clack of sticks, listen to a story. Many years ago in old Japan, in the mountains of the northern province, there lived a poor stonecutter named Tara. He was so happy carving stone lanterns for priest or warlord, shogun or samurai. On the night of the Feast of Lanterns, Tara delivered a beautiful stone lantern to the house of a wealthy warlord. Tara was dazzled by the magical beauty of the rich man's garden of lanterns. The next morning, Tara could not forget the magnificent garden he had seen. All day, he thought, why do I work so hard and get so little? I make beautiful things for others. I wish Tara were rich enough to enjoy beautiful things. Tara, carver of stone, your wish is granted. Be a rich man. This can't be true. There is no spirit of the wind. It must be true. I am a rich man. So Tara enjoyed being rich and became very idle in luxury and much eating. Huh? The Emperor. He is all-powerful. I wish to be Emperor. Tara, richest of rich, your wish is granted. Be Emperor. So Tara became Emperor of all Japan and lived a life of much happiness. The sun is more powerful than Emperor. I wish to be the sun. Tara, Emperor most powerful, your wish is heard. Be the sun. Ah, now I can scorch the earth, burn down cities. Storm cloud puts out sunlight, stops fire. Spirit of the wind, I wish to be a storm cloud. Tara, mighty sun, your wish is granted. Be a great storm cloud. Now I am greatest and mightiest of all. I reign on emperors, rich men, and the sun-scorched fields. Is the mountain able to stand against my lightning and rain? I must be a mountain, able to stand against all. Tara, mighty storm cloud, this wish is granted. Be a great mountain. Now, let all powers come. I am greatest of all. Spirit of the wind, if man can chip away great mountains, command me to be a man. Tara, mighty mountain, be yourself. So Tara became a poor stonecutter again. He was happy making beautiful stone lanterns for others. The sun is more powerful than emperors. The storm cloud is mightier than the sun. Mountains can defy a great storm cloud But Tara, the stonecutter, is more powerful than all.
Once upon a time, in a place called Sugarland, lived a tiny chocolate princess. Her father was the Sugar King and her mother was the Sugar Queen. They lived in isolated splendor, not knowing anything except their own sweet land. The chocolate princess was lonesome. One day while playing in her sugar yard, Chocolate spied a very different-looking little boy. He was round, completely round. "Who are you?" Chocolate asked. "My family name is Ball," the strange boy answered. "What's your first name?" asked Chocolate. "Sourball," he stated with pride. "Oh," said Chocolate, "you look different than us, but that doesn't mean we can't communicate with each other, does it? Where do you come from?" "Come from a place called Sourland," said Ball. "Well, how did you get here?" said Chocolate. "I rolled all the way," answered Ball. "Roll? Could you teach me how to roll?" "I think so," said Ball. And so Ball taught the Chocolate Princess how to roll and how to jump through baskets like a basketball. Help! And he even taught her how to do eyes. Learning new things made the princess very happy. Ball would make the roll every day to the other side of his land just to laugh and learn about how others live. One day, however, the Sugar King said to Chocolate, "My dear, you must marry the Candy Cream Center." "Yes," said the Queen, "you're much too grown up to waste all your time just playing in the sugar yard." Chocolate was very sad. And poor Sour would make the long roll every day, but the little princess would not be in the sugar yard anymore. Soon the day of Chocolate's wedding came, and all the inhabitants of Sugarland were excited and waiting for the wedding. Poor little Sourball heard about the great wedding that was about to take place in Sugarland between his Chocolate Princess and the Cream Center. Sour was mighty upset, so he started to roll towards his sugar in Sugarland. He rolled with all his might, and he was afraid he would be late and lose his Chocolate Princess. Minutes before the wedding, a little ball came hurtling right through the window of the church and landed right in the middle of the Cream Center. Poor Cream Center. He was a mess. "Stop the wedding!" "What is this? He doesn't look like us. He's different. But he's handsome and clever. What kind of candies would you have? Why would you want to be with someone who looks like that?" "Because it's what's inside that counts." I never thought of that.
Once, long ago, in a city by the sea, there lived two brothers. One was captain of a great ship, and he was as rich as he was mean. The other was a poor man named John, and he had a kind and cheerful nature. The holidays were coming, and the poor brother's wife was sad, for her pantry was empty, and she liked to give the poor children who lived nearby a party on the holidays. She asked her husband to go to his rich brother and borrow from him enough food for the party. John set off to the house of his brother. When the rich sea captain learned the reason for the visit, he was not happy. But after much hemming and hawing, he agreed to give John a ham, 3 loaves of bread, a piece of cheese, and a dozen apples. But the miser made his easygoing brother promise that if he ever came into good fortune, he would give in return anything asked of him. On his way home, John met an old man with a long white beard who looked so thin and worn and hungry that it was pitiful to see him. When the old man begged for food, John gave him, though he had little enough himself, a loaf of bread, some cheese, and 2 of the apples. As he was about to slice a piece off the ham, the old man stopped him. This is more than enough for me, cried the old white-beard thankfully. And he told John a secret. Nearby was the entrance to the home of the little people of the hill. Inside, hidden behind the door, was a mill the little people had once stolen from the old man. Though the little people knew it was a magic mill, they did not know how to make it work. They lock their doors if they see me coming, said the old man. But if you go there, I'll wager they'll trade the mill for your ham. And he promised John he'd wait for him and show him how the mill worked. The old man was as good as his word. For when John returned from the home of the little people with the mill under his arm, the old man was still waiting for him. He quickly showed John how to work the mill, how to start it and how to stop it. And John almost fainted with surprise, for the magic mill ground out all the food he could imagine. It ground out fat sausages and lean bacon and chestnuts and cherries and pears. Oh, John thanked the old man and told him that if he ever again needed anything to eat, he should come to his home. And the old man in turn thanked John and disappeared into the woods. When John returned home, his wife was sad, for he had no food and only the old mill under his arm. But when John showed her what the mill could do, her eyes danced with delight. She clapped her hands and cried, "Now we can have a real party for the holidays, a party that all the children and all our friends will remember for years." And they did. What a holiday party they had. John invited everyone he'd ever met, and even people that he knew only slightly, and they all crowded into John's little house. There was everything you could think of to eat and drink. Beef, pork, turkey, lamb, fish, and chocolate cake and ice cream for the girls and boys. Oh, a gay and happy holiday party for all. A few days later, when John's rich brother heard the news, he raced to John's house. Angrily, he inquired how it was that his poor brother was able to give such a lavish affair. And when John showed him the magic mill, the miserly sea captain's eyes narrowed with greed. "You must give me this," he cried, and reminded John of his promise. "I then," said John, "a promise is a promise," and gave up the mill. But he was not too downhearted, for he had already stored in his cellar enough food to last for many a year. The rich brother raced home with the mill. Though John had shown him how to work it, the miser had not paid attention, for his mind was full of a plan. When he received a contract for some cargo, he would sail a few miles out to the sea, turn on the mill, fill the ship with the cargo, and return to port, where he could sell the cargo for a good deal of money. As chance would have it, the first cargo he contracted for was salt. Out he sailed, trembling with excitement and greed. He set the mill on the deck and started it grinding out salt. Soon the first hatch was full, then the second, then the last. The miser now wanted to turn off the mill, but to no avail. Out poured more and more salt. No matter what he tried, it was useless. Soon salt covered the decks. The mill went right on grinding. The salt covered over the top of the cabin. Higher and higher grew the pile of salt. At last, with a great groan, the ship sank down to the ocean floor. And there it lies to this day, the magic mill still grinding away. And that is the reason, and the only reason, some folks say, why the sea is salt. Once upon a time, there lived a very rich king, whose name was Midas, and who had a beautiful little daughter called Marigold, whose hair was the color of purest gold. Now, this King Midas liked gold more than anything else in the world, and he made it his custom to spend part of every day in a dreary room in the basement of his palace, where he counted his gold. And one day, while Midas was in this basement room, a stranger appeared. "You are a very wealthy man, King Midas," the stranger said. "I've done pretty well," answered Midas, somewhat sadly. "And pray, what would satisfy you?" asked the stranger. Midas paused and thought. He had a feeling that this stranger had the power to grant any wish that he might ask. At last, Midas looked up and said, "I wish that everything I touch turned to gold. In that way, I know I would have all the gold I could want." "And are you sure that this would satisfy you?" the stranger said. "You will never regret your choice?"
I ask nothing else to make me perfectly happy, answered Midas. So be it then, said the stranger. When you awake tomorrow morning, you will find yourself gifted with the golden touch. The following day, Midas leaped out of his bed in joy. He seized one of the bedposts, and it immediately turned to purest gold. He took up a book from the table and discovered that each of its pages had turned to gold leaf, but all the wisdom of its pages had grown illegible. In his garden were a great number of beautiful roses in full bloom, but Midas knew a way to make them far more precious. He took great pains in going from bush to bush, and using his magic touch, every individual flower was changed to gold. Returning inside, Midas was seated at breakfast when his daughter came into the room crying. How now, little lady, said Midas. Pray, what is the matter with you this bright morning? Marigold, without taking the apron from her eyes, held out her hand, and in it was one of the roses Midas had so recently turned to gold. Beautiful, exclaimed her father. And what is there in this magnificent rose that makes you cry? She answered that she did not care for roses that had no fragrance. Midas tried to busy himself with his breakfast, but unfortunately everything he touched turned to gold. His coffee, his toast, his eggs, all solid gold. Very pretty to look at, but hardly tasty. Here was literally the richest breakfast that could be set before a king, but its very richness made it absolutely good for nothing. Soon was King Midas' hunger so great that he groaned aloud. And Marigold, concerned for her father, threw her arms affectionately about him. He bent down and kissed her. My precious Marigold, he said. Marigold made no answer. Little Marigold was a human child no longer, but a golden statue. In despair, Midas suddenly beheld the stranger standing near the door. Well, friend Midas, said the stranger, pray, how do you succeed with the golden touch? Midas shook his head. Gold is not everything, answered Midas, and I have lost all that my heart really cared for. You're both richer and wiser than you were, King Midas, said the stranger. Tell me now, do you sincerely desire to rid yourself of this golden touch? It is hateful to me, replied Midas. Go then, said the stranger, and take some water from the river that glides past the bottom of your garden. Sprinkle it over any object that you may desire to change back again from gold. Midas snatched up a great vase, which turned, of course, to gold at his touch. But when he reached the river, he dipped it into the water and was happy to see it change from gold into the same vase it had been before he touched it. Hastening back to the palace, the first thing he did, as you need hardly be told, was to sprinkle the water over the golden figure of little Marigold. No sooner did it fall on her than the rosy color came back to her cheek, and she became a real little girl again, just as she'd been before her father had kissed her. The only thing about her now that was gold was her lovely golden hair. Many years later, when King Midas became quite an old man, he was fond of telling Marigold's children this marvelous story. And to tell you the truth, my precious children, he would say, ever since that morning, I've loved no other gold than this.
What is white? White is a dove, and lily of the valley, and a puddle of milk spilled in an alley, hailstones, halibut bones, and some people's telephones. And breath is white when you blow it out on a frosty night. White is the sound of a light foot walking. White is a pair of whispers talking. White is the beautiful broken lace of snowflakes falling on your face. You can smell white in a country room toward the end of May, in the cherry bloom. What is gold? Gold is a metal. Gold is a ring. Gold is a very beautiful thing. Gold is the sunshine, light and thin, warm as a muffin on your skin. Gold is the moon. Gold are the stars. Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and Mars. Gold is alive in a flickering fish. It lives its life in a crystal dish. Gold is feeling like a king. It's like having the most of everything. What is red? Red is a sunset, blazy and bright. Red is feeling brave with all your might. Red is a sunburned spot on your nose. Sometimes red is a red, red rose. Firecracker, fire engine, fire flicker red. And when you're angry, red runs in your head. Red is an Indian. A Valentine heart, the trimming on a circus card. Red is a great big rubber ball. Red is the giantest color of all. Red is a show-off, no doubt about it. But can you imagine living without it? What is green? Green is the grass and the leaves of trees. Green is the smell of a country breeze. Green is lettuce and sometimes the sea. Green is a coolness you get in the shade of the tall old woods where the moss is made. Green is a flutter that comes in spring when frost melts out of everything. Green is a grasshopper. Green is jade. Green is hiding in the shade. Green is an olive and a pickle. The sound of green is a water trickle. April is green. Peppermint, too. Every elf has one green shoe. Under a grape arbor, air is green, with sprinkles of sunlight in between. Green is the meadow. Green is the fuzz that covers up where winter was. Green is ivy and honeysuckle vine. Green is yours. Green is mine. What is black? Black is the night when there isn't a star and you can't tell by looking where you are. Black is a pail of paving tar. Black is jet. Black is a cat, a leopard, a raven, a high silk cat. The sound of black is boom, 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 echoing in an empty room. Black is licorice and patent leather shoes. Black is the print in the news. Black is beauty in its deepest form, the darkest cloud in a thunderstorm. Think of what starlight and lamplight would lack. Diamonds and fireflies if they couldn't lean against black.
That's a heck of a place to put a silo.
Les crinches, les chickens, les salauds, les couchers, les whiplash des fermiers, les billes de damage.
Barney, you fathead. That's the third aircraft you busted up this month. You've got the entire squadron on assigned rest.
Sorry, Captain.
Shut up, Barney. There is one way, however, you can redeem yourself. I need a volunteer.
Oh, no. I get claustrophobia in them kitchens, man. I got to be in the air where the action is. Blasting them Huns with my Beckers.
Be cool, Barney. I can't have that kind of violent talk in front of my teeny bopping daughter's picture.
Oh, yeah. I'm hip.
Besides, this mission is serious. Your assignment is to fly over enemy lines, land and rescue the captured French air ace, Francois Defeat. He's being interrogated in a farmhouse by a German intelligence officer. Here are your sealed orders in detail.
Oh, beautiful, baby. I'm ready. Let's go. How about my camel, Corporal Lackluster?
All set, Lieutenant. Say, if you got a minute, I'd like to show you my latest...
Don't bug me, man.
But you can't miss with this. It's an air-to-air missile, complete with printed instructions. Whew.
You're sick. Now back off. Contact. Whoa, boy. Whoa. Straighten up and fire up. That's it. Now, let's see what these orders say again. Beware of enemy resistance due to unfortunate security leak. Hey, that security leak is a gush.
Achtung! Yankee, you dare for challenge? Baron von Ribbentrop? Was Scheier in a Deutschland Haus? Die Powder. Oh! Which means your brother is a balloon. Lieutenant Mausen, Stelle Vakanzen Stünförner. Out! Steinewatzen, Geigensen, Döllern of Eiden, Föhnen, nicht Steinstämmwassen.
That's for openers. Man, I got a groovy finish. It's you, clown. Oh, man, I got him uptight now. He's reeling. Them French chicks is gonna blow their minds when I stomp in wearing that Medal of Honor. He's getting to me now. Where's that Lackluster's rocket? I'm taking that Kraut boy with me. It says, simply light fuse, and it's supposed to go. That's it.
Was ist this?
Oh, man, that Lackluster is gonna hear from me. We're gonna have some kind of out-of-sight court-martial. This is it, man. Old Francois in there, I know. Boy, them Huns is really putting him through his paces. I'll just tear in there and start busting them up. All right, this is a raid. Drop everything. You're...
Huh? Ah, at last, my precious butterfly. I've caught you in my love nest. Hold tight, mon chéri.
Dummkopf! Schweinehund!
She love taps. It is a good sign, yes? She plays hard to get.
just a lint-picking minute.
You will rescue me from this foreign masher, no?
No way, ma'am. I come to rescue that captured Mr. DeFeet.
But he's not captured. He surrendered to be with me. Yes.
Oui. I surrender my heart, my soul, my being. Love is my captor. Take it. Funny, you look a lot like your brother.
Oh, he's gone mad.
Mad with passion and amour.
Sorry, Francois, but this is a war, not a love-in. Orders is orders. Nothing personal.
Dankeschön, mein friend. How can I ever thank you?
Why, don't mention it. So long, and I'm sorry about this war.
It's so noisy, ain't it?
Auf Wiedersehen.
Storm, I'll have your bars for this, you bubble-headed clown.
What'd I do, Captain? I brought home that French fella, didn't I?
That's just the trouble. You let that crazy Frenchman loose on this field. Look out this window up in the sky.
Who's that with him?
My innocent teeny-bopping daughter. That's who.
Oh, my God. I sure hate to go through this again.
Ah, yes, my pussycat.
Oh.
You kiss like this at 5,000 feet. What it must be like on the ground.
Oh, too much. Oh. Oh.
Fantastic.
Lackluster in his crummy rockets, my wheels falling off, my goggles all full of grease, my machine gun is bent. I sure wish I was back in Apple Creek fishing. Jeez, I wish I was back here.
There was a fella here once by the name of Jim Smiley in the winter of '49. Oh, maybe it was the spring of '50. I don't recollect exactly. But anyway, he was the curiousest man about always betting on anything that turned up you ever see. If he could get anybody to bet on the other side. And if he couldn't, he'd change sides. Any way that suited the other man would suit him, just so as he got a bet, he was satisfied. If there was a horse race, you'd find him flush, or you'd find him busted at the end of it. If there was a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a dog fight, he'd bet on it. Why, if there was two birds sitting on a fence, he'd bet you which one would fly first. If he even see a straddle bug start to go anywheres, he'd bet you how long it would take him to get to wherever he was going to. And if you took him up, he'd follow that straddle bug to Mexico. He'd bet on anything. The dangest fella. Well, this year Smiley, he catched a frog one day. He took him home, and he said he calculated to educate him. And so he never done nothing for 3 months but sat in his backyard and learn that frog to jump. And you bet you he did learn him, too. He'd give Daniel Webster a little punch behind. Daniel Webster, that was the name of the frog. And the next minute, you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a donut. See him turn one somerset, or maybe a couple if he got a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right like a cat. Smiley kept that frog in a box. And one day, a feller, a stranger in camp he was, he asked him, what's he got in the box? And Smiley says, sort of indifferent-like, might be a parrot, or it might be a canary, maybe, but it ain't. It's only just a frog. And the fella took it and looked at it carefully and turned it around this way and that, and he says, so 'tis. Well, what's he good for? Well, says Smiley, easy and careless, he's good enough for one thing, I should judge. He can out-jump any frog in Calaveras County. Well, the fella took the box again, took another long and particular look, and he gave it back to Smiley, and he says, very deliberate, well, he says, I don't see no points about that frog that's any better than any other frog. Maybe you don't, Smiley says. Maybe you understand frogs, maybe you don't understand them. Anyways, I got my opinion, and I'll risk $40 that he can out-jump any frog in Calaveras County. And the fella studied a minute, and then he says, kind of sad-like, well, I'm only a stranger here. I ain't got no frog, but if I had a frog, I'd bet you. And then Smiley says, that's all right, that's all right. If you hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog. And so the fella took the box and put up his $40 along with Smiley's, and he sat down to wait. He sat there a good while, thinking and thinking to himself. And then he got the frog out and prized his mouth open and took a teaspoon and filled him full of quail shot. Filled him pretty near up to his chin and set him on the ground. Well, Smiley, he went to the swamp and he slopped around in the mud for a long time, and finally he catched a frog and fetched him in and give him to this fella. And then he says, now, if you're ready, set him alongside of Daniel with his forepaws just even with Daniel's, and I'll give you the word. And then he says, 1, 2, 3, get. And the new frog hopped off lively. But Daniel, he give a heave, and he hoisted up his shoulders, but it weren't no use. He couldn't budge. He was planted solid as a church, and he couldn't no more stir than if he was anchored out. It was Smiley. He was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted, too. But he didn't have no idea what the matter was, of course. Well, the fella, he took the money, and away he went. And Smiley, he stood scratching his head and looking down at Daniel a long time. And at last he says, I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed off for. Wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. He appears to look mighty baggy somehow. And he catched Daniel and hefted him, and he says, why, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pounds. And he turned him upside down, and out come a double handful of shot. Well, Smiley, he seen how it was, and he was the maddest man. He took out after that feller, but he never catched him. And from then on, he never made another bet. Because, as he said, seeing as how there was one man who could outsmart me, I might find another. And I just wouldn't be able to stand the embarrassment of losing twice.
Once upon a time, there was a poor soldier who had but one thing he could call his own. And that was an old tinderbox, which he had gotten from a witch. The tinderbox was not much to look at, but the soldier discovered that there was something very special about it, for it was a magic tinderbox. By striking it, the soldier could command a great dog who would do whatever he asked. Now, in the city where the soldier lived, there was a very beautiful princess. Her father, the king, kept her locked up in the great castle because it had been foretold that his daughter would marry a common soldier. And this the king did not like at all. The soldier, hearing of the beautiful princess, was determined to see her. And of course, he had his magic tinderbox. So he struck the box, and when the dog appeared, he told it to bring the princess to him. The dog left immediately, and before the soldier had time to realize it, he saw he was back again with the princess. She was sitting sound asleep on the dog's back. And she was so lovely, anyone could see she was a real princess. The following day, the soldier longed terribly to see the lovely princess again. And so the dog came during the night, took her, and ran off just as fast as he could. But an old lady-in-waiting who was keeping watch by the princess's bed ran just as hard after him. When she saw them disappear into a large house, she thought, now I know where it is. And she drew a large cross on the gate with a piece of chalk. Then she went home and lay down, and the dog came back too with the princess. But when he saw that a cross had been drawn on the gate where the soldier lived, he took a piece of chalk and marked crosses on all the gates throughout the town. Now, early in the morning, the king and queen, the old lady-in-waiting, all the officers of the court went to see where the princess had been going. There it is, said the king when he saw the first gate with the cross on it. No, my dear husband, it's there, said the queen, who was looking at the second gate with the cross. But there's one there, one over there, they all cried together. And wherever they looked, there were crosses on the gates. They could see it was no use trying to find it. So the queen filled a small bag with fine small grains of buckwheat, tied it on the princess's back, and when that was done, she clipped a little hole in the bag so that the grains would be sprinkled wherever the princess went. During the night, the dog came again, took the princess on his back and ran off with her. The dog did not notice the grain sprinkling along the road from the castle right up to the soldier's window. But in the morning, the king and queen saw quite clearly where their daughter had been. And so they seized the soldier, threw him into prison, and said, "Tomorrow you must be hanged." Well, in the morning, the soldier looked between the iron bars of his little window and could see that everyone was going off to watch him be hanged. Among them was a cobbler's boy, and the soldier called to him, "Hi, you, cobbler's boy. There's no need to be in such a hurry. There won't be anything doing before I get there. I'll just run along to where I live and fetch my tinderbox, and I'll give you a shilling." The cobbler's boy was very anxious to have his shilling, and so he scurried off to get the tinderbox, which he quickly brought back to the soldier. Outside the town, a great gallows had been built, and all round it stood the soldiers and hundreds of thousands of people. The king and queen were sitting on a beautiful throne immediately opposite the judge and the whole council. The soldier had already mounted a ladder, but just as they were going to fasten the rope about his neck, he said, "The wrongdoer is always granted a harmless request before he undergoes his punishment. I would dearly love to smoke a pipe of tobacco. It would be my last pipe in the world." Now, the king could not say no to that, so the soldier took his tinderbox and struck a light. At once, there stood the large dog. "Now help me so I shan't be hanged," said the soldier. And the dog quickly chased the judge, the council, as well as the king and queen so far away that they never returned. And all the people cried out, "Little soldier, you shall be our king and have our lovely princess." The princess left the castle and became queen. She liked that. The wedding lasted a week, but that was only the beginning, for they all, the princess, the soldier with his magic tinderbox, and his faithful dog, were to live happily ever after.
Once upon a time, there was a boy named John who lived alone near the bank of a river called the Susquehanna. One day he was sitting under a drooping willow tree, fishing in the rolling Susquehanna, when suddenly he felt a hard pull on his line, and soon he pulled out a giant fish with blue and silver gleaming scales. Young John threw him on the green grass, and the poor fish flung about and turned and twisted himself, looking all the while at his captor. It seemed to John almost as though the fish was trying to talk to him. And young John, suddenly filled with sorrow for the fish, picked it up and flung it back into the water. The next day, young John went fishing again. He caught pike and pickerel, sunfish, and catfish. He had about enough when he heard a great splashing, and there was the big fish to whom he had given freedom. The fish leaped and plunged about, and then flung something from his mouth right at young John's feet. Young John saw it was a bluish, black, gleaming, hard stone, the like of which he had never seen before. And the fish swam around as if waiting for something. But young John went home. The next day, young John went fishing as he did every day.
and again there came the blue and silver gleaming fish. Again he flung a blue-black stone at young John's feet and kept swimming upstream as if to lead him somewhere. This the fish kept doing day after day, and young John put away all the blue-black stones in a corner of his shack. One day he saw smoke over the trees of his home. He ran quick as his legs would carry him and found the house burned. Not a stick was left. All was black except a gleaming glow among the blue-black stones the fish had given to young John. The fire in these stones kept on burning and burning for a long time, and young John could not understand it. The next day he went fishing, for though he had no roof over his head, he had to eat. There was the fish again with one of the stones in his mouth, swimming back and forth as if going somewhere. This time John realized that the fish wanted to show him where the black stones could be found. By now young John had the feeling that there was something special or different about this fish. So he packed his fishing rod and followed him. For 2 full days the fish swam upstream and John followed. Then the fish left the broad Susquehanna and turned into a little river that went up into the mountains, and then he disappeared. John looked up and down the river, but the fish was nowhere in sight. He wandered about for a time, and then, just as he was about to give up, a band of Indians came by, and John told them what had happened and why he was there. They led him to their village, where he saw the blue-black stones burning. When the fire was low, the Indians added more of these stones. They told him there was enough of them in the mountains to heat the Indian fires for as long as the sun would shine. Then John at last understood why the fish had led him up the river. The blue-black stones were a reward for sparing his life. He built a raft and loaded it with the stones and steered it down the rolling Susquehanna as far as Harris Ferry, now called Harrisburg. There he told all about the hard stones and how they burned better and longer than logs. He sold them to the settlers and went back for more. He kept getting the black hard stones, coal they were called, selling them, and soon became a rich man. And all because of an act of kindness. For kindness is the seed from which riches grow.
An aspiring genius was Darius Green, the son of a farmer, age 14. His body was long and lank and lean, just right for flying, as will be seen. He had 2 eyes as bright as a bean and a freckled nose that grew between. Now wise he must have been to do more than ever a genius did before, excepting Daedalus of yore and his son Icarus, who wore upon their backs those wings of wax he'd read of in the old almanacs. Now here's how Darius reasoned the facts. The birds can fly, and why can't I? Must we give in, says he with a grin, that the bluebird and Phoebe are smarter and we be? Just fold our hands and see the swallow and blackbird and catbird beat us hollow? Does the little chattering sassy wren, no bigger than my thumb, know more than men? Just show me that. Or prove that the bat has got more brains than's in my hat, and I'll back down, and not till then. That Icarus was a silly cuss, him and his daddy Daedalus. They might have known wings made of wax wouldn't stand sun heat and hard wax. I'll make mine of leather, or something or other. Darius kept his secret from all the rest, safely buttoned within his vest. And in the loft above the shed, himself he locks with thimble and thread, and wax and hammer and buckles and screws, and all such things as geniuses use. 2 bats for patterns, curious fellows, a charcoal pot and pair of bellows, an old hoop skirt or 2, as well as some wire and several old umbrellas, a carriage cover for tail and wings, a piece of harness, and straps and strings, and a big strong box in which he locks these and 100 other things. And day after day he stitched and tinkered and hammered away, till at last 'twas done. The greatest invention under the sun. And now, says Darius, hooray for some fun. 'Twas the 4th of July, and the weather was dry, and not a cloud was on all the sky, save a few light fleeces which here and there, half mist, half air, like foam on the ocean, went floating by. Just as lovely a morning as ever was seen for a nice little trip in a flying machine. Thought Darius, I'll fly a few times around the lot to see how it seems, then soon as I've got the hang of the thing, as likely as not, I'll astonish the nation and all creation by flying over the celebration. And away he sped to open the wonderful box in the shed. Quickly Darius dressed for flight, put on his wings and strapped them tight, jointed and jaunty, strong and light, buckled them fast to shoulder and hip. 10 feet they measured from tip to tip. Now he stretches those wings like a monstrous bat, peeks over his shoulder this way and that, for to see if there's anyone passing by. But there's only a calf and a gosling nigh. They turn up at him a wondering eye to see, by golly, he's going to fly. Away he goes. Jiminy, what a jump. Flop, flop, and plump to the ground with a thump, fluttering and floundering, all in a lump. Poor old Darius. Upon his drown, in the midst of the barnyard he came down, in a wonderful whirl of tangled strings, broken braces and broken springs, broken tail and broken wings, shooting stars and various things. Away with a bellow fled the calf, and what was that? Did the gosling laugh? 'Tis a merry roar from the old barn door. And he hears the voices of people crying, "Say, Darius, how do you like flying?" Slowly, ruefully, where he lay, Darius just turned and looked that way. "Well, I think flying is sure all right," he said, "but there isn't such a thundering sight of fun in it when you come to light." I just have room for the moral here, and this is the moral: stick to your sphere. Or if you insist, as you have the right, on spreading your wings for a loftier flight, the moral is, take care how you light.
In Boston, 1775, just 1 year before the American Revolution, outraged American colonials were openly opposing unjust tax laws, and the presence of British soldiers in the Navy brought about vigorous attempts to overthrow British rule. The cry was, "No taxation without representation," in angry defiance to a parliament far away across the sea in Britain, defiance which was to flare into violence and revolution. Artemus Ward recently had been made general of the new colonial army, which had been secretly formed to defend American rights. It was on this day in June that he learned the British had decided on a military occupation of all the towns around Boston. This was bad, as Cambridge would be occupied, which was the headquarters of the new American Provincial Congress. A committee of safety for the colony met and quickly decided that it appears of importance to the safety of this colony that possession of the hill called Bunker's Hill in Charleston be securely kept and defended. General Ward immediately ordered Colonel Prescott and the American militia to defend Bunker Hill, which lay directly between Boston and Cambridge. On June 10th, he had assembled his volunteer army of 900 men on Cambridge Common. At dark, they marched off to Bunker Hill. When they reached the narrow neck of land across to Charleston, Prescott decided to defend not Bunker Hill, but Breed's Hill close by, lower down, and much more difficult to defend, which meant building a new fort by daylight, sight of the British fleet. However, they worked fast, and by dawn the next day, they had finished digging. But they had been seen, and the British man of war Lively opened fire on the fort. The cannon fire roused Boston, and Generals Gage, Howe, and Burgoyne met over breakfast to decide what to do. All the British fleet now opened fire on Breed's Hill, and many felt it was time to leave. Colonel Prescott sent out units to defend the hill down to the shores of the Mystic. By 6 o'clock, General Gage had decided to send out his grenadiers to remove the provincials from Breed's Hill. Colonel Prescott further reinforced his defenses, protecting his right flanks. Orders came from General Gage. The British grenadiers, 1,550 strong, lined up on the Boston docks, waiting to be ferried across the Charles River. Artillery was added to the fort by Captain Gridley. Colonel Prescott sent Major Brooks to Cambridge to ask for more men, and General Ward in Cambridge ordered out another volunteer regiment. During the morning, the British troops were ferried across, and by noon, all were ashore at Morton's Point. Prescott continued to build his defense down to the Mystic, and more artillery was added to the rail fence line. Back in the busy fort, Dr. Warren of the Safety Committee in Cambridge had arrived. Also, veteran soldier Israel Putnam and old General Pomeroy, all champions of the cause of American liberty. General Howe at Morton's Point, meantime, ordered Charleston to be set afire to discourage American snipers. When all the men were ashore, he ordered the drums to beat call to arms. By 3 o'clock, the troops stood before him on the slopes of Breed's Hill, where he addressed them and said, "I will not ask you to go a step further than I go myself at your head." His plan was to attack the fort from the rear, then to charge the fort up Breed's Hill. The light artillery would lead the way to break the defenses. However, they were given the wrong size cannonballs and could not fire their guns. Up in the fort, preparations for the battle ahead were going on. This was the decisive moment the Americans had been waiting for so long, and they now had to prove their independence. As the disciplined redcoats started their slow march up Breed's Hill, Colonel Prescott warned his men to hold their fire until they were close enough to see the whites of their eyes. The first British attack was made by the Welsh Fusiliers along the banks of the Mystic, up to Captain Stark's position behind the barricade. The Colonial Volunteers fired a massed volley from close range, killing many British soldiers. The survivors fled. The first plan had failed. Now the frontal assault led by General Howe reached the rail fence when the full blast of close fire dropped many redcoats. The rest retreated out of range. On the left side of the hill, American snipers continued firing from the burning buildings. The men remaining in the fort had been on duty 24 hours and were now very tired, and there were no reinforcements. General Howe reformed his troops and attacked again. "50, 40, 30 yards. Fire!" The British troops suffered heavy casualties again, wavered, broke, and fled downhill. Although he had now lost half his troops, wounded or killed, General Howe refused to admit defeat and called up his reserves. The Americans in the fort, who had thought they had won, hurriedly reloaded and prepared for yet another attack by the redcoats. Low on powder and shot, they were now few in number and exhausted. General Howe ordered his men to leave their heavy packs and to attack in open ranks in light order. Now they were over the rail fence into the fort. It was hand-to-hand combat. Stones, rocks, anything against swords and shot, man to man. Colonel Prescott knew it was time to retreat. Dr. Warren died among the many American casualties, but the retreat was orderly. The British General Burgoyne described the American retreat as no flight. It was covered with bravery and skill. The British at nightfall had taken Breed's Hill, but with terrible casualties. 226 dead, 828 wounded. The Americans, 140 killed, 271 wounded, 30 captured. The issues between the British and Americans were now clearly defined. Things could never be the same again between the two countries. General Gage wrote to London, "The loss we have sustained is greater than we can bear." Colonel Prescott's stand became a symbol of American determination to go alone, which would unite the 9 colonies in a single protest. Breed's Hill Fort was to become a pattern for every hill around Boston, a defeat that turned into a victory, and known forever as the Battle of Bunker Hill.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances, and so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again towards childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. When daisies pied and violets blue and lady smocks all silver white and cuckoo buds of yellow hue do paint the meadows with delight, the cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men, for thus sings he, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. Oh, word of fear, unpleasing to a married ear. When shepherds pipe on oaten straws and merry larks are ploughmen's clocks, when turtles tread and rooks and daws, and maidens bleach their summer smocks. The cuckoo then on every tree mocks married men, for thus sings he, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. Oh, word of fear unpleasing to a married ear. When icicles hang by the wall, and Dick the shepherd blows his nail, and Tom bears logs into the hall, and milk comes frozen home in pail, when blood is nipped and ways be foul, then nightly sings the staring owl, to-hoo, to-whit, to-hoo, a merry note while greasy Joan doth keel the pot. When all aloud the wind doth blow, and coughing drowns the parson's saw, and birds sit brooding in the snow, and Marion's nose looks red and raw. When roasted crabs hiss in the bowl, then nightly sings the staring owl, to-hoo, to-whit, to-hoo, a merry note while greasy Joan doth keel the pot.
In the middle of the 17th century, there lived in France a very gallant man named Cyrano de Bergerac. He was an excellent swordsman and a marvelous writer of verses. One evening, while strolling through a garden in the moonlight, Cyrano and his companions began to discuss the moon. It is possible, said one of his friends, that the moon is simply a window of heaven. Another thought it might be the sun himself who, resting for the night, peeps through a hole to see what's happening in the world. Cyrano did not agree. In his opinion, the moon was a world like ours, with people living on it. And to the men in the moon, our Earth itself seemed to be their moon. Cyrano's friends could hardly believe their ears. "Oh, no, my dear fellow," they cried, and many of them doubled up with laughter. Alone in his chamber, Cyrano determined to find a way to voyage to the moon and prove his theory. All through the night, he searched in his library of books to find a plan. He made notes and sketches, but all to no avail. In the first light of day, he suddenly had an idea. The rays of the sun, he reasoned, lifted the morning dew from the grass and raised it into the air. Inspired by his idea, he raced madly about this way and that, filling up bottles with dew. When he had filled enough bottles, he strapped them about his person, stood in the sun, and waited. He later wrote of what happened. The sun so violently darted his rays on the glasses full of dew that the heat which attracted them, as it does the thickest clouds, carried me up so high that at length I found myself above the middle region of the air. Cyrano rose so rapidly that he began to fear he might fly past the moon. So he broke some of the bottles in an attempt to slow down his flight. As luck would have it, he broke too many. Instead of reaching the moon, he suddenly found himself falling back to Earth. While he had been flying, however, the Earth had been turning. So instead of landing in his own land, Cyrano came to rest on the other side of the world, in the wilderness of Canada. This new land, it seemed to Cyrano, was almost as strange as the moon itself. It was inhabited by savages. But luckily for Cyrano, they spoke French, for this was the part of the New World known as New France. The savages seemed friendly enough, But Cyrano was taking no chances. He set to work at once, building a new flying machine. Even if he didn't reach the moon, he might at least be able to fly back to his own country. He equipped this machine with wings and used a spring as his source of power. Cyrano wrote of it, "I had made a machine which I fancied might carry me as high as I pleased. I placed myself within it, and from the top of a great rock threw myself in the air. But because I had not taken my measures aright, I fell with a crash into the valley below. Bruised as I was, I returned to my chamber." The next day, Cyrano returned to the valley where he had left his machine. To his surprise and horror, he discovered a group of soldiers taking liberties with his invention. They were loading the flying machine with firecrackers and were about to blow it up for their own amusement. Wrote Cyrano, "I ran up to one soldier, plucked the match out of his hand, and in a great rage threw myself into my machine that I might undo the fireworks that they had stuck about it. But I came too late, for hardly were both my feet within, when away I went, up into the clouds." The firecrackers had exploded. As one after another went off, the machine rose higher and higher in the air. In Cyrano's words, "The force of the fireworks carrying me so high, and the machine plying its large wings, everyone must have taken it for a fiery dragon." Up and up Cyrano flew, but as the crackers burned out, the flying machine slowed down. One last great firecracker exploded, and Cyrano shot upward as the machine fell back to earth. "Adieu, machine," cried Cyrano. Looking back down between his legs, he could see the earth growing smaller and smaller. All his efforts had been crowned with success, for within another hour or two, Cyrano de Bergerac landed on the moon. Or at least, so he has written.
From GG Communications, now comes to the screen Hans Christian Andersen's classic fairy tale, The Little Mermaid. The world of this fantastic and incredible adventure unfolds with brilliance and beautiful color in full animation. A film for the entire family, The Little Mermaid, rated G.